Hey everyone. As you know, protests are happening all over the U.S. to draw attention to police brutality and the ongoing injustice Black Americans are forced to endure. Make no mistake, PodCastle supports Black Lives Matter and we demand justice for Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and all victims of police violence. If you want to help but don't know where to start, please look up and donate to your local bail fund and the National Bail Fund Network. Bailfunds.github.io is one resource with a list. When everything looks bleak and you don't know what to do, look outward to your community. We help ourselves by helping each other. Solidarity. PodCastle, episode 629 for June 2nd, 2020. Though She Be But Little, by C.S.E. Cooney. Rated PG-13. Hello, and welcome to PodCastle. I'm your host, Setsu Uzume, and I am absolutely delighted to present you with this week's tale, which sits at the perfect level of weird. Though She Be But Little has appeared in Uncanny Magazine, 2017, Subterranean Press's The Best of Uncanny Magazine, which is out this year, and The Best Science Fiction and Fantasy of the Year, Volume 12. It was written for you by C.S.E. Cooney. C.S.E. Cooney is the author of World Fantasy Award-winning Bone Swans Stories. Her short novel, The Twice-Drowned Saint, is included in Mythic Delirium's anthology, The Sinister Quartet. Her forthcoming novel, Saint Death's Daughter, will be out with Rebellion in the spring of 2022. Other work includes Tor.com novella Desdemona and the Deep, and a poetry collection, How to Flirt in Fairyland and Other Wild Rhymes, which features her Riesling Award-winning The Sea King's Second Bride. Her short fiction and poetry can be found in Jonathan Strand's anthology Dragons, Ellen Datlow's Mad Hatters and March Hares, all new stories from the world of Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland, Rich Horton's Year's Best Science Fiction and Fantasy, and elsewhere. The story will be read for you by Julia Rios. Julia Rios is a queer Latinx writer, editor, podcaster, and narrator whose fiction, nonfiction, and poetry have appeared in Latin American Literature Today, Lightspeed, and Goblin Fruit, among other places. Their editing work has won multiple awards, including the Hugo Award. Julia is a co-host of This Is Why We're Like This, a podcast about how the movies we watch in childhood shape our lives, for better or for worse. They've narrated stories for Escape Pod, PodCastle, Pseudopod, and Cast of Wonders. Find them on Twitter as OMG Julia. And now, strap on your best heavyweight stacked plate champion wrestling belt and enjoy the story.
Though She Be But Little, by C.S.E. Cooney. Narrated by Julia Rios. Emma Ann had a tin can attached by a string to her belt. Lots of things on strings bounced and banged from it, some useful, like the pocket knife, some decorative, a length of red ribbon longer than herself, looped up, some that simply seemed interesting enough to warrant a permanent yo-yoing to her person. A silver handbell, a long blue plume, the cameo of an elephant head wearing a Victorian bonnet. Emma Ann's Heavyweight Stacked Plate Championship Wrestling Belt, Captain Howard called it. Captain Howard often capitalized the first letters of words she spoke aloud. The belt was leather and embossed bronze, like a python wrapped twice about Emma Ann's torso. It had appeared along with Captious and Bumptious the night the sky turned silver. So had the tin can. They were all part of Emma Ann's endowments. Endowments was the pirate word for objects or traits materializing post argentum. Post argentum, another phrase of their design. Pirates had words for everything, but pirates were liars. Emma Ann hadn't known how to use any of her endowments at first. Nothing was obvious until it was. She brought the tin can up to her mouth and spoke into its cavity as clearly as she could. Endowments obeyed intent. Emma Ann to Margaret Howard. Come in, please, Captain Howard. Captain Margaret Howard, way pirate of Route 1, did not deal in tin cans. What she had was her parrot, George Sand. George Sand got reception.
Rock!
Emma Ann's tin can blatted back at her.
What do you want?
What do you want? Over, Emma Ann corrected. She wouldn't have corrected Captain Howard to her face, but George Sand never failed to get on Emma's nerves.
Rock!
Take it and rock yourself, said George Sand.
Over.
There was a pause while Emma Ann's chest tightened. The tin can blatted.
Captain Howard makes her apologies for her rude bird. Over. Please continue, kid. Over.
She took a deep breath and decided not, after all, to cry. Captain, I've had a second visitation. It's the loping man for sure. I think he's coming for me tonight. Can you please meet me at Potter Hill Preserve? He's been showing up around 8 o'clock, so if you could come before that, I'd be really... But I understand if you'll be out... Emma Ann knew the word she wanted to say, or knew that she had known it not too long ago. It dissolved at the back of her throat like a vitamin C tablet, left a tang. George Sand provided.
Carousing, it squawked. Roistering. Wassailing. Possibly pillaging. Pirate banquet tonight up at the grill. Starts at 7. Mandatory.
Another pause, wherein, Emma Ann surmised, Captain Howard related something to her parrot even it would not repeat.
Over.
Bye, said Emma Ann, in a much smaller voice. She let the tin can fall. It bonged hollowly against her knee. Captious sighed. Well, that went about the way we thought. Bumptious let out a gentle oof as Emma Ann flopped against his head. Being composed of fake fur and synthetic fiber batting, he was barely fazed by Emma Ann's constant casual assaults upon his person. Margot Howard's not reliable, said Bumptious. She used to be, before the sky turned silver. Remember how she organized the book club? Volunteered for every church committee? She made loads as an X-ray tech too, Emma Ann, and always so modest not to mention it. But she did have one of those halfy cars that ran on lightning as well as gas, and you know they didn't come cheap. Electricity, Emma Ann murmured to herself, to make sure she remembered it. It was hard to think with the loping man looming close as nighttime. Hybrid cars. She sure ain't modest now, Captious observed. Captious was a weasel, stuffed like Bumptious, about a third his size, like Bumptious, occasionally sentient. And who needs cars, anyway, when you got a big old flying alligator for an endowment? Eats prisoners for fuel, all the parts, very sustainable. What if you run out of prisoners? Bumptious countered. His orange eyes glinted. They were made of that hard, cool plastic that looks and feels like glass. Emma Ann liked to tap on it with her fingernails when Bumptious was asleep. At the rate she goes through prisoners. They probably beg her to throw 'em to the alligator once she's had her way with 'em. You don't know her, Emma Ann yelled, pushing them both away. Bumptious tumbled onto his back, legs sticking straight up. His tail hung limp. He had no stripes on his belly. You don't know her now, and you didn't know her then. Or me. You weren't there. Stop pretending you were. A short, messy scrabble took her from her nest of bricks at the bottom of the old smokestack where she slept, and right to the ledge. From there, careless of her knees, She jumped down into the green and golden wilderness of the overgrown lot where the smokestack stood. At her intrusion, the insect orchestra encountered a fermata, but when she made no further rash movement, it started up again, pianoforte. Emma Ann stood still, legs itching, staring blankly into the heady, dying afternoon. Mugwort grew up all around her, higher than her shoulders and fragrant as chrysanthemums, leafy underbellies a play of silver and white. Tall, tumbleweedish sweet clover with seeds that smelled of vanilla, tangled up with spotted knapweed, then trailed off into plumy goldenrod, floating foxtail grass, haughty towers of purple asters. Emma Ann might turn left and wend her way to Milltown. She might turn right and sit meditatively on the bank of the Pawcatuck. There were paths through this place, but you had to know where to step. Roads embroidered the old Potter Hill Preserve, dating from 1911 when the mill had first been built, with its water wheel and red brick textile factories. 100 years later, the Preservation Trust had reclaimed the preserve as a historic site and walking park. When the sky turned silver, Potter Hill became something else, just like everything. She craned her head over her shoulder, glancing back at the smokestack. The entrance to her hideaway was too high to climb to without assistance from the three-legged chair haphazardly stashed in a nearby bush. Both Captious and Bumptious had poked their noses out of the hole to stare at her with their plastic eyes. They never moved when she was looking. "You really ought to take us with you," advised Captious with a look of cunning. "You know the loping man is lurking." "What can you do?" Emma Ann asked. "Protect you," Bumptious asserted stoutly. He was good at assertion. Emma Ann ignored him. "Anyway, he won't be around right now. The loping man's not into daylight hours. He's more crap." She paused. The word she wanted was vanishing at the edges. "Craptastic," guessed Captious. "No, creepissimo, creepylicious, creepo mojito." "No, stop, I know it, he's crepuscular." She paused, grinning. "You know, like deer and rabbits." Weasel and tiger stared as only stuffed animals can stare. They often chose to desert their sentience as a kind of consequence whenever they thought Emma Ann was getting above herself. Though they were her closest companions, though they comforted her through thunderstorm and famine, she did not trust them. Endowments could take you over if you weren't careful, if you didn't try to remember all the time that you hadn't always been what you'd become. Take, for instance, Mrs. Emma A. Santiago, Navy widow, age 65. When the sky turned silver, Mrs. Emma A. Santiago woke up Emma Ann, 8 years old, in her gym jams and Velcro sneakers, one belt, one tin can on string, 2 stuffed toys the richer. Sans house, sans car, sans monthly bunco night with her girlfriends of 40 years, sans everything. The bunco gals had all been turned into the Chihuahua ladies, who tottered around Milltown on red high heels that were fused with the flesh of their ankles. Their necks were long and smooth, covered in fawn-colored fur, their heads tiny and large-eyed, with long ears that twitched at the slightest sound. They traveled in a pack of 12, furry necks writhing like pythons, and yapped whenever they saw Emma Ann. She avoided them and Milltown until her supplies went from meager to mere rearrangements of empty jars and boxes. Captain Margaret Howard said the silver sky had come to turn people into what they really are. She said this as fact, the way pirates say things. Emma Ann wasn't sure, but she did remember thinking, in her old life, that she'd never succeeded very well at feeling grown up, that the achievement of adulthood had seemed a series of accidents covered by pretense. She had feared dying not for death's sake, but because of the malingering notion that she'd missed several key milestones in life. She wondered if, given the choice, she'd have chosen death over this perpetual childhood. She had never wondered enough to put it to the test, yet. In all likelihood, she wouldn't need to. Death might come. Indeed, tonight would come, as sure as gators fly, in the form of the loping man. And she, a child alone in the wilderness, powerless to stop him. It was barely 6 when Captain Howard came to Potter Hill. This late in the autumn, that made it almost full twilight. But Captain Howard was a one-woman bonfire and lit up the overgrown lot as she glided into it. Her vest was scarlet with golden frogs and golden tassels. It swept to her knees. The vest, though idiosyncratic, was not an endowment. Captain Howard had pilfered it from the Milltown Theater, which had not, for whatever reason, changed into anything other than itself when the sky turned silver. She wore a blunderbuss at her right hip and a cutlass at her left. They'd appeared under her pillow and in her shower, respectively, just post Argentum, where she couldn't miss them. Change occurred more rapidly after that. Returning, bewildered, from a walk around what had been her neighborhood that first morning, Margaret Howard had discovered her home had become a kind of grotto, complete with the sound of sea waves crashing in the distance and a thin green veil of damp on the granite walls, and all the sofas changed to sofa-shaped mounds of ingots and goblets and pearls and things. In that offhand, brazen way she had, Captain Howard shouted, "Ahoy, matey!" and, leaning over her saddle, dumped the contents of a large, greasy paper bag labeled "The Grill" onto the designated stoop of Emma Ann's smokestack. Such riches tumbled out. Biscuits sogged in gravy, a roasted turkey leg, 2 twice-baked potatoes wrapped in foil, corn on the cob, salted and buttered, a flask of hard cider. Emma Ann stared, from food to captain, from captain to food. "Oh, well," said Captain Howard, interpreting this look. "So I dropped in on the grill on my way here for maybe 5 minutes while the caterers were, catering. Picked up a few things. Purloined them, you might say," she added with great relish. She tended to roll her R's at her most piratical. "Scoundrel!" George Sand squawked from her shoulders. "Brigand! Bandit! Thief!" The way pirate of Route 1 bowed with the falsest of modesties from her seat on the back of her flying alligator. Margaret Howard had found HMS sunbathing on her rooftop one morning post Argentum. After that, she didn't miss her Prius. Floating before the entrance like that, captain and gator blocked out most of the dusk. Emma Ann was comfortable in that dark. She liked that her smokestack was too small to fit people like Captain Howard and HMS. That meant her smokestack was safe. The surface area allowed for a maximum occupancy of herself, Captious, Bumptious, and a few supplies. On the vertical, it was occupied by a small bat colony that benevolently kept Emma Ann malaria-free by consuming a brute majority of the local mosquito population. "Anyway, kid," continued Captain Howard at her airiest, "just thought you might be hungry. Eat." Emma Ann hastily swallowed a gobful of cheesy potato, but not before she politely thanked Captain Howard for dinner. It had been a generous gesture, nor had it been, Emma Ann believed, the pirate in Captain Howard who did it. It was an act of pure Margot, her friend from before, the one who'd started the book club and ran bake sale fundraisers for any shaggy cause that came begging. Margot'd done good works and well, not seeming to care if the tasks proved themselves thankless or less than successful. Margot had not been a bunco gal. "I'll donate my $10 to UNICEF, thanks," she said, the first few times Emma Ann had invited her, until Emma Ann stopped inviting her. But by now, Margot was mostly the way pirate of Route 1, and it was best to mind your manners around her. Captain Howard pooh-poohed Emma Ann's gratitude with a negligent hand motion. She had perfected a certain flick of the wrist that sent her cufflace frothing over the warm brown elegance of her wrist. Her hair was a bundle of ropey black braids, atop which perched a scarlet tricorn like a caravel. "So, you've seen your gentleman caller again, have you?" she asked. "That's what, twice now you've said?" Emma Ann gagged, spat up neatly in a napkin. "Yes, Captain, twice. Last night was the second time." You know what they say happens on the third night." "Yes, that's why I called you." The first night you see the loping man, it is clear you have come to his attention. He stands for hours at a distance, peering and peering. If you try to sneak away, he'll follow, always just in sight. On the second night, the loping man comes closer, close enough that you can see his lips writhing, stretching, puckering, smacking, working. He is close enough that the sound of his chewing eats at your ears. On the third night, the loping man, he'll throw you onto his shoulders and he'll run with you. Run and run and run and run. You'll die up there. He'll run so long you'll starve and die, or die of fright, and you'll turn to bones which will clatter against the bones of all the other children he's taken, which drape his neck and chest like handcrafted bamboo and coconut wind chimes. How Emma Ann understood all this, never having met the loping man face to face, or indeed any children other than her own self, she did not know. It was as if she'd always known the legend of the loping man ever since the sky turned silver, a story she'd been born into. "When he walks," Emma Ann whispered, "his knees come up to touch his ears. His mouth is awful. He's worse than anything in Milltown." Captain Howard, who fancied herself a fairly creditable contestant in Milltown's pool of big bads, looked affronted. "How so?" I don't think he's from here. I don't think he ever was." "Ah," Captain Howard cleared her throat. She toyed nervously with one of her gold-worked buttonholes. "How on earth, if you'll pardon the archaic expression, can you even tell anymore?" "I just can." Emma Ann scooted a little closer to the mouth of the smokestack, trying to peer into Captain Howard's shadowed eyes. "The loping man's like the endowments, like HMS and Captious and Bumptious. They came after. They're not made from anything that was before. I mean, even George Sand was your ugly French bulldog before it was your parrot." "Georgie was never ugly." "It farted all the time, Margot. It had bad breath." "She was an old dog." "It's a pretty ugly parrot, too." "I can't believe I stole dinner for you, Santiago." They glared at each other. Suddenly, it was as if Emma Ann weren't 8 and Margot Howard weren't a pirate, and they were friends again and could speak as friends. Bumptious began growling. Captious started up a wheeze. HMS gently, buoyantly turned her face so that one yellow eye shone like a lamp into Emma Ann's dark space. Captain Howard cleared her throat. Look, I can't stay much longer, Emma Ann. They're expecting me at the grill. We're electing a pirate king tonight after the banquet, and I have to be there. I just stopped by to, well, anyway, good luck with the loping man and all. I thought maybe I'd lend you my... She patted first her right hip, then her left, as if debating whether to part with the cutlass or blunderbuss. Her hands trembled. Emma Ann understood. It would be the same for her if she tried to give up captious or bumptious. Finally, Captain Howard's hands fell heavy and still to rest on her thighs. Nothing more to say. Emma Ann bit her bottom lip so hard her teeth almost went through. I get it, okay? But I had to call. You're the only grown-up I know. Captain Howard was, Emma Ann reflected gloomily, the only anyone she knew, if you didn't include the Chihuahua ladies, whose long necks and tiny teeth scared her. Sighing, shaking her head, Captain Howard groaned. Oh, Emma Ann, I can't help you. Don't you see? It's nothing to do with the banquet, really. It's that you're my feral child. All pirates have one eventually. We'll have to fight a duel to the death one day, and only one will survive, if that. We're natural enemies. And yet you keep feeding me. Captain Howard took off her hat and fanned her face with it. She looked guilty. Emma Ann couldn't tell if it was pretend guilt or spontaneous disclosure. She muttered, It's your fault for being so damned skinny. How can I fight a duel with a scarecrow? Not sporting. How can you fight a duel with a corpse? Again they exchanged glares, so nearly friends they almost hated each other. Emma Ann broke first. She pulled her knees up under her chin and set her forehead between them. Go away. Just go away. I don't need you. I don't care. Captain Howard's hand reached into the smokestack to squeeze Emma Ann's shoulder. In a low, urgent voice, almost as if she were trying to speak so that HMS and the stuffed animals could not hear, she said, You're my doom, Emma Ann. That's clear as the silver sky. But your doom is the loping man. I think that means you've been given the tools to face him. You've had them all along. That's all I know. Emma Ann jerked her shoulder away. I have a tin can. I used it to call you. You can't help me. You just said. Captain Howard stiffened. Aye, then. That's what I said. She slapped the tricorn back onto her braids. A right rascal I be, me hearty, she added with bitter jocularity, leaning forward in her saddle to press her whole body's weight against HMS's head. Endowments responded to intent, but alligators respond to pressure. Captain Howard used both in spades. They flew off into the twilight, outlined in new stars, making sensuous S-curves all the way back to Route 1. The loping man came by moonlight. He must always come by moonlight. The first thing you see, far off across the overgrown lot, is the dull, radioactive glow of the bones draped all about him. But before that, you hear the chewing. It is louder than the soughing of knapweed and mugwort, louder than the night sigh of speargrass, and it is awful. Emma Ann heard it. That sound shrank the horizonless prairie land of her daytime domain to its exact dimensions, 94 feet long by 50 feet wide. She saw the green glow and saw it grow and scuttled back against the far wall of her smokestack, clutching Captious and Bumptious close to her. Captious hissed, Stop breathing! Emma Ann smashed a hand over her nose and mouth and reduced herself to an airless heartbeat. Only a hearth-shaped patch of outside was visible to her strained eyes, moon-soaked to a depth-defying gray. The insect orchestra had shivered to a hush at the loping man's excruciating progress. He moved as slowly as the hour hand of a clock, so long as you held your breath. The moment you gasped, he would tick forward at second-hand speed, like a roach when you turn on the lights. In the blackness of the flue, Emma Ann could not see Bumptious squashed in her lap, only feel the long, silent reverberation that was not a purr. Captious was quiescent in her fist. The hesitant shh-ing as the loping man rustled forward. The distinctive crick as he lifted his long folded forelimbs right up to his ears. The curt staccato tuck as his feet touched down. The long silences between while he waited, daring her to inhale. Soon he was close enough that Emma Ann's spotted vision caught the movement of his mandibles as he chewed. The endowments on her belt trembled and danced on their strings like a mobile in a windstorm. Shh, crick, tock. He advanced. He had the benevolent face of a mantis, prophetic, wizened, gray-green, vaguely worried. His compound eyes were mournful, fixed on Emma Ann's face. Alas! Breath burst upon her. Despair poisoned the sweet night air as it filled her lungs, and he was too close, right outside her smokestack close, his head level with her hearth close, and she had seen him neither lope nor leap, nor heard the final tock of his step. She wondered if her own heartbeat had outslammed it. Green bones loosely wound him, like the Mardi Gras beads and feather boas that the Chihuahua ladies, nay bunco gals, wore even now, traveling in their pack of 12. Where are they now? Thought Emma Ann, and began to cry. Bunco gals needed only 12 to make up their tables evenly. 4 to a table, partners sitting across from each other. Each gal shelled $10 into the pot, making a tidy pile for the end of the night, when both winners and losers trotted away with a fistful of swag, some amounts more nominal than others, and only the mediocre players leaving empty-handed. Emma Ann had always been the 13th bunco gal, earning her the nickname Ghost. As odd one out, she would begin the first rotation of the game, rolling dice for an invisible partner. This, she felt, was her just punishment for never once having failed to RSVP late. But it did dislocate her socially right from the get-go. It set her at an invisible body's distance from the rest of her friends. Poor Ghost, her friends laughed at her, and laughing forgave her. Our late great Emma Ann. She was, or had been, just dreadful at checking her email for the monthly Bunco Gals Party Night reminder newsletter. Never mind replying to it. Eventually, her friends, organized by Jime Ortiz, arranged to take turns calling her personally on her landline. You should really get a cell phone, Emma Ann, for emergencies. And usually twice, once to invite her, once to remind her. They even started picking her up in their Buick Centuries and Chevrolet Impalas and Cadillac Club sedans, with the tacit understanding that Emma Ann was, in turn, to be designated driver on the way home. This obligatory inability to consume more than one margarita during the between rounds pitcher pass was but another barrier to her social enjoyment. It did, however, enable her, as the only adult equal to the task of counting to 21 by the end of the night, to keep a fairly tidy score, and therefore a modicum of self-respect. But she never did buy that cell phone. For emergencies. Staring into the loping man's gravely gentle eyes, Emma Ann forgot to fear her friends. Oh, but she missed them. She wanted them back, yaps and fangs and beads and all. She sucked in a huge breath, slowed time, her fingers moving to the handbell hanging from her belt. If Emma Ann were still who she once had been, she'd have called it a bunco bell, identical to the one used to ring their game to order. But tonight she was just a child gone feral under a silver sky, and this bell was her endowment. If only she knew what it was for. The loping man's raptorial forelegs lifted, slow as sap moving, landing delicately on the hearth of the smokestack. Slow as grass dying, they reached for her. His jaw worked and gaped, worked and gaped, and gaped, and gaped. Did he, then, take the head first, before all? Chew the brains like bubblegum? No chance of survival, then, of jumping from his back as he ran. She'd just be a body, slung across his shoulders for a later and more deliberate mastication. His segmented abdomen looked vast, insatiable, capable of containing several Emma Anns and all her endowments. "Captious!" she squeaked, expelling breath without replacing it. Her left hand pinched the silver bell's clapper, holding it soundless. Her right hand clutched some part of the stuffed weasel. "If I close my eyes, can you move fast enough?" A dubious pause, as Captious agreed to understand the full import of her question. "There's fast enough," she said. "And then there's suddenly you're a head shorter and a human stole. It's kind of 50-50. "I can," Bumptious piped up from her lap. "I can move fast enough, Emma Ann, if you trust me." Emma Ann sat in the brick dust and bat guano and her own warm urine, nose and eyes running, mouth dry, not breathing. But those forelegs kept sliding in, inexorably, that triangular head following, and soon the loping man would be there with her, right inside her sanity. No, not sanity. Her septic tank. No, that wasn't... Sanctum, 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 from the Latin. Oh, he was enormous, colossal, an armored giant, but so very terribly compactable. Yes, and maybe that was where he went all day. Not away, but down, folded into leaf and twig and compound eyes, origamied into torpor. "I won't look," Emma Ann promised Bumptious with the last of her breath. "I promise." An ecstatic Bumptious cried, "Thank you," as Emma Ann's eyelids slammed shut. She gasped for breath. Stink seeped back into her nostrils. The ammonia and cat litter smell of the guano, her own excreta, and the loping man's rapidly invading odor, like the damp mystery of mushrooms, as he pressed in at speed. But now there came between her body and the loping man a roar that better belonged behind an enclosure of stainless steel wire rope mesh than in the non-living body of a plush toy. Bumptious had attacked. Almost immediately, Captious began to writhe in her fist. "Let me go! Let me go! Hell stars and moonworms! He's halfway gone to Gullet! No, Bump, don't! Emma Ann, let go!" She didn't have time to obey. Captious sank her manifestly non-textile teeth into her wrist and wriggled loose. A weasel-shaped wind tunnel shot from the palm of her hand toward the hearth. Then nothing. Just the sound of chewing. But not, Emma Ann noticed when she dared peek again, easy chewing. It was half gagging, half gurgling, as if the loping man had thought he was getting squid nigiri for dinner and ended up with a mouthful of magna pinna mixed with cotton candy. Emma Ann's trembling left hand released the clapper of the silver handbell. It chimed faintly against its bowl. Outside, not so very far away, an answering chorus of yips lit the night. Wrist throbbing, Emma Ann stared down at the endowment and understood it. Why, after all, did the Chihuahua ladies always seem to turn up whenever Emma Ann came to Milltown? following her and her chiming, clinking, tinkling belt around. They recognized the bunco bell, and they wanted to play. Emma Ann lifted the bell in hand with new vigor and gave it 12 sharp rings. The bats in the smokestack awoke, diving all ways for open air. The loping man flinched back from their wings, or from the noise, or perhaps he sensed not far behind him the red thunder of high heels, the raking and the making of manicured claws, the loyalty of old friends to their ghost. As crowded as the smokestack had been a moment before, it was now deserted of everything but Emma Ann. Captious and Bumptious, the bats, the loping man, all gone, even the echoes of the silver bell gone. Outside, the world exploded in sound. Shh, tock, flap, shh, yip, yip, flap, tock, tock. All this threaded together by growling, scruffling, dragging. Something hurled at speed against the brick base of the smokestack. Emma Ann flung herself to her belly and crawled to the ledge, peering down into the starlit dark over the lot. The loping man bled a black-green ooze that glowed, illuminating at least himself and whatever his blood fell upon. He was still chewing, frantically, foam and synthetic fiber batting bulging from his cheeks and the upper seams of his segmented abdomen, where he seemed to be bursting. The Chihuahua ladies harried him doggedly, but though they were fierce, the loping man's right foreleg swept 2 of them off their feet, his left spearing another clear through the shoulder and flinging her into the mugwort and sweet clover and knapweed in a fireworks of fragrance. At that petering howl of dismay, Emma Ann dropped the bell and groped for her belt. Her fingers found the loop of red ribbon and tugged it loose. She ran it between her hands, pulling the midsection taut. Without daring to think about what she did, she pushed herself into a perching crouch and waited till he was close enough again, and jumped from the smokestack right onto the loping man's back. Once, twice, thrice went the red ribbon around the prothorax. Her legs squeezed lower down, his limbs rose around her like scissors every time he moved. He flailed as she pulled tighter. His thrashes went wild. He backed up against the smokestack as if to rasp her off his back, like a bear marking territory on trees, or a businessman scraping dog shit from a shoe. She looped the red ribbon about one fist and tugged her pocket knife from its knotted string. Just beneath the jaw then, that killing jaw, spilling over with the stuffed bits of Captious and Bumptious. Let no child wake to the sound of his chewing again. There. Emma Ann arrived late to the pirate banquet, but she was used to that. Besides, she reflected, could you be late if you were never even invited? She rode in through the open doors of the grill. The grill, in 1912, had been a fruit and vegetable stand owned by a tiny Italian man, full of nautical invective and conflicting tales about his arrival on Ellis Island. The stand later became a full-service cafeteria for Milltown factory workers. Still later, a discotheque, complete with gold lame go-go dancers in cages. Now it was the favorite watering hole of pirates, which meant a fishy smell, a lot of black and red decor, a great deal of skulls, snakes, and the occasional hourglass. Emma Ann didn't know how many pirates there were in Milltown and its environs. There seemed to be hundreds. HMS was not the only floating alligator tethered to the flagpole outside. Raucous as they were, the whole hairy, tattooed, shirtless, accoutered, and aggressive lot of them fell silent at the sight of her. Even George Sand, stalking back and forth along the scarred bar and holding forth at length, rocked to a surprised standstill. Mounted on the now headless loping man, Emma Ann was taller than the tallest of them. The skin of her legs stuck to his abdominal chitin, glued there by his ichor, and she was not sure if she would ever be able to tear herself free, or if she herself had now become, in essence and in accident, the loping man. Her hands were tangled in the red ribbons that bound his thorax. From his neck hole, where her pocket knife stuck out like a bolt, sprouted 2 partially chewed stuffed animal heads, one a tiger, one a weasel. They peered around the grill with eager or ironic plastic eyes, and did not seem to care much anymore if their movements were witnessed. Chihuahua ladies flanking her like an honor guard, Emma Ann rode right up to Captain Howard. The way pirate of Route 1 was sprawled on a throne of yet more decorative human skulls, wearing nothing but a lopsided paper crown from a defunct fast food restaurant Emma Ann could barely remember. Gooberbling. Booger ring. Something. Blunderbuss and cutlass bobbed through the air like a conductor's batons as Captain Howard led the pirates, badly, through an incoherent variation of Fiddler's Green. She continued bellowing verses long past the quelling of her pirate court. Whether this was because she was drunker than they, or simply less impressed with Emma Ann's entrance, only she could say. But at last even she stopped, squinted one eye, and looked the newcomer up and down. Emma Ann, glowing with gore, returned the glare. "Guess you got elected Pirate King." Captain Howard burped. "Guess you survived the night, feral child." They eyed each other, waiting for the gauntlet slap, the taunt, the inciting incident for their final duel and doom. Emma Ann sighed and rolled her shoulders. "Got any food, Margot?" Her grin scullier than an ossuary, Captain Howard spread her arms wide to indicate the masses of lasagna, the mounds of Italian bread, the wheels of Parmesan, and heaps of cannoli, strufoli, panna cotta. "Maybe," she teased. "Sing for your supper, Santiago?" Emma Ann opened her mouth, to sob, to scream, and choked on a surprised laugh. Raising her chin, she squared her shoulders and met Captain Howard's gaze, and bellowed, "I dug his grave with a silver spade." Everyone, Captious, Bumptious, the Pirate King, her pirates, her parrot, even the Chihuahua ladies joined in. "Storm along, boys, storm along, John."
And welcome back. You know what's funny? These people, they go to sleep, everything's fine, everything's good. They wake up the next day and the whole world's different. That was a deep cut of stupid memes from the birth of the internet. Earlier this year, Michael Bond wrote an article in Eon magazine that suggested a connection between Alzheimer's and navigation. Imagine being dropped into a location and having no emotional or causal connection to the place, and that is the root of the difficulties Alzheimer's patients have to deal with. The article went on to suggest that you know where you are only if you can tell a story about the place, or remember how you found your way there. Cooney revealed to us that this story is a little bit about how grown-ups can still feel as lost and at odds with the world around them as a child in the wilderness, and a little bit about the complexity of friendships, and a little bit about what happens when the sky turns silver and your stuffed toys start talking to you. Mrs. Santiago's transformation into Emma Ann made me think of that article about Alzheimer's, and to a greater extent, what adulthood even is. Maybe it's winding down into dignified sophistication, or maybe it's covering your house in action figures because it's your house and you can do what you want. In both cases, there was probably a story of how that vision of adulthood came to be. The world's different now. We've come a long way from G.I. Joe PSAs, and maybe we're different too, but we still have it in us to guide the story of what those differences mean. And that was our show for this week. On behalf of everyone here at PodCastle, our audio engineer Peter Baravesh, our forum moderator Aussie Cat, your co-editors Jen Albert and Sheree Clark, along with all of our fantastic first readers, including Julia Patt, Catherine McMahon, Eleanor Wood, Matt Dovey, Aidan Doyle, Hamilton Perez, Amalia Harrington, Kai Hudson, Devin Martin, Ace Ratcliffe, Julian Jarbo, and Craig Jackson. Thanks for letting us share another story with you. PodCastle is part of Escape Artists Incorporated and is distributed under the Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. That means you are free to share our episodes, but please don't sell them or change them. If you like what you heard, head over to patreon.com/EAPodcasts and subscribe, and be sure to leave wonderful, positive reviews everywhere you possibly can. Our music is by Shiva in Exile, and we will be back next week with another tale. See you then.